Hello, good morning, dear members of the EuroMeSCo family. It is an honor and a great pleasure to welcome you to this new edition of the EuroMeSCo Annual Conference. Welcome and warm thanks to all speakers and participants, and thanks in particular to Director-General Popowski and his team for the support and the great cooperation, as this event, as you know, is organized as part of a project co-funded by the European Union. Some of you have participated in previous editions of the EuroMeSCo Annual Conference, which are always a very, I would say, inspiring and special moment to gather and share a couple of days together. We are missing this. To our EuroMeSCo members, I can assure you that we are looking forward to seeing you and organizing a physical annual conference next year. Networking is a critical and necessary ingredient to our work. However, we are glad to turn this situation into an opportunity and take advantage of the online format to open our doors even further and involve a broader audience. The fact that 400 people registered to this event shows that there is a genuine interest in the issues which we will be discussing today. Before I say a word about the topic of the conference, let me quickly explain to those who don't know EuroMeSCo who we are. We are a network of more than 100 think tanks and research centers from both the European countries and Southern Mediterranean countries. Our core mission is to contribute to Euro-Mediterranean policies and relations through research, dialogue, and advocacy activities. And I would like to stress the point that we are not only a network of institutions, which is very important by itself. We are a network of people, a network of friends of different origins and very often of different opinions, but who share the same goals, the same ideals to build around the Mediterranean an area of peace and stability, of shared economic progress, and an area of intercultural dialogue and understanding north and south of the Mediterranean. Which brings me back to the topic of this conference. Director-General Popowski will tell us more about the joint communication which was published a couple of months ago, announcing a renewed partnership between the European Union and its southern neighborhood and a new agenda for the Mediterranean. Let me remind you that it was published at a symbolic and critical time. Symbolic because, you know, we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Barcelona Declaration a few months ago, and critical because the pandemic obliges us to rethink some of the parameters of our Euro-Mediterranean cooperation and innovate. What we want to achieve with this event is going through today to this joint communication, and in particular to some of its most strategic issues through a series of short panels and interventions. More precisely, this event and other activities, with them we want to contribute to an inclusive discussion of the new agenda for the Mediterranean, how it will be implemented, how it will be rolled out. We hope new ideas and perspectives will come out from these debates and will be helpful to everyone. And now I have the honor to introduce the keynote speech of this session. If we have the Director-General Maciej Popowski for the official presentation of the joint communication, renewed partnership with the Southern Neighbourhood, a new agenda for the Mediterranean, with this official presentation by Director-General Popowski for Neighbourhood and Enlargement negotiations at the European Commission. So, Director-General, our dear friend, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. Thank you for having me. And indeed, it's a pleasure to present the communication to you, and I would also like to express our gratitude to EuroMeSCo, a long-standing partner, which has been proactively engaged in the reflection leading up to the new agenda for the Mediterranean. I'm sure everybody has read it. Maybe some of you know bits and pieces of the communication by heart, but I would still like to recall the main lines. The southern neighborhood of the EU has always been a region of strategic importance for us. We share the same sea, we share the same resources, we share a lot of challenges, and throughout the history, people from both shores of the Mediterranean have traded, exchanged, and influenced each other in all aspects of life, from food to architecture. So indeed, 25 years ago, the Barcelona Declaration was adopted, and the EU and its other partners committed to turning the Mediterranean into an area of dialogue, exchange, and cooperation, guaranteeing peace, stability, and prosperity. And here we are, a quarter of a century later, taking stock of the 10 years since the Arab Spring as well, and the 5 years since the latest review of the European neighborhood policy. So we thought that was exactly the right moment to adapt our partnership with the region to today's realities. 2020 was a uniquely tough year for all of us, but it also taught us some important lessons. Firstly, it certainly reminded us how interdependent we are with our neighbors. It's not just the COVID pandemic, which resulted in over 17 million full-time jobs lost and double-digit drops in GDP across the southern neighborhood. The disastrous consequences of conflict and terrorism do not respect borders, and global phenomena such as climate change and migration continue to require joint responses. And above all, 2020 taught us that by acting together, we can turn common challenges into opportunities and shape the future together. There is a motto to the new agenda for the Mediterranean, which is build resilience together. It sets a positive partnership with people at its core, especially the youth, which accounts for nearly half of the region's population. By 2030, the region's population will increase to 581 million. And these young people who are hard hit by the social economic impact of COVID-19 deserve opportunities to a fair and sustainable life. To realize the agenda for the period between 2021 and 2027, we'll mobilize up to 7 billion euros under the new instrument that we have at our disposal, Neighbourhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument, also known as Global Europe, which will help leverage private and public investment of up to 30 billion for the southern neighbourhood alone. The economic and investment plan for the southern neighbourhood will be the blueprint for our action. It's a product of feedback from our partners, and will help spur long-term sustainable and inclusive social-economic recovery. The plan includes 12 concrete flagship initiatives in priority sectors to support competitiveness and growth. So since the adoption of the communication on the 9th of February, both our member states and partner countries have welcomed our new agenda, underlining it is fit to tackle the joint challenges and take advantage of opportunities created by the drive for reform and green and digital transitions. So we are refocusing our approach in two ways. First, our approach is people-centric. So in discussing with ministers from the region, they all highlighted the need to focus on the impact of our actions, in particular on the most vulnerable, young people, women, and in an interconnected world where some sectors, including digital and health, advance at the speed of light, we cannot afford a two-speed growth, and we don't want to leave anyone behind. We also propose to bring together all of our EU toolbox. So from policy and political dialogue to different instruments, grants, loans, guarantees that we have at our disposal. That's the way of being much more effective than we were in the past. In a region with increasing competition from external actors, and where according to the 2020 EU Neighbours polls, over 60% of respondents believe that the EU support is effective, we need to continue to work together to strengthen our resilience and build our joint prosperity. The EuroMed survey, which I found very enlightening, recalled that the EU's added value in the region compared to other global players is the contribution to sustainable and inclusive economic development and promoting good governance, human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. The selection of 5 themes of the communication reflects the pillars of our agenda. So firstly, the joint communication reiterates our commitment to good governance, rule of law, equal access to basic social services, including health and vaccines, with COVAX deliveries having arrived already in Jordan and in Palestine over the past weeks. Efficient, transparent, and accountable institutions are the bedrock of sustainable economic development. And in this respect, we propose to step up opportunities to take advantage of the potential the digital transition has to offer in creating user-centric administrations, and will support further cooperation in Horizon Europe and the Erasmus Plus programs, which have allowed young people to expand their skills. Secondly, we propose a holistic perspective on economic development, supporting resilient, inclusive, sustainable, and connected economies. Nevertheless, we emphasize the role of reforms as enablers of change. They will be key in creating a conducive business environment and investment climate, as they will help build local and international investors' trust. Now, job creation, especially decent job creation, is central to our agenda. We call on our partners to engage with the social partners and private sector to develop and implement policies to promote job creation, especially in the social, green, and blue economies. And we need more women at work. So we need this women empowerment to participate formally in economic activities, and their active participation could add 47% to the MENA region's GDP. On our side, we'll continue to develop and support financial inclusion initiatives and focus on banking and non-banking solutions to regions' SME funding gap. And a new guarantee instrument called EFSD Plus will be a key in making it happen. Trade and investment can play a role to unlock the region's untapped potential. We have learned our lessons from the crisis, such as the risks of over-dependency on a limited number of suppliers and the dangers of protectionism. While we continue to emphasize the importance of respecting agreements and transparency, we propose to modernize trade and investment relations, as there's growing interest in the fields of services and investment facilitation. Since the 2008 financial crisis, many companies began to see long supply chains as risky, and focus on aligning regulatory frameworks would help drive much needed foreign direct investment and support the development of sustainable regional value chains that could create diversification opportunities for European companies. We should also seize the opportunity to increase connectivity, both for trade and transport towards Africa and across the region. This will no doubt help improve economic integration and reduce the cost of trading. Moving on to digital sphere, digitalization got a big boost from the crisis in Europe and elsewhere, and it's an opportunity, and we must not let it slip away. With its young and educated workforce, the Southern Neighbourhood can compete in the global digital economy. We therefore propose to strengthen the infrastructure and skills that can support further digitalization and help to build a legal framework that respects users' rights and allows doing business online, especially for the SMEs. The third pillar would be to look at COVID that has increased the desire for some people to look for opportunities elsewhere. And our priority remains preserving lives while providing international protection for those who need it. And this is fully in line with the new EU Pact for Migration and Asylum, which will actively work to develop comprehensive, tailor-made and balanced migration partnerships, taking into account the EU and partner countries' unique needs and interests, and stepping up cooperation on return, readmission and reintegration, and making returns more effective are important elements of these partnerships. We also committed to support legal migration and mobility in cooperation with member states. Fourthly, in the Mediterranean, we cannot speak of opportunities without mentioning the green transition. The global climate hotspot, over the past few years, the Mediterranean has experienced the impact of climate change firsthand. We need to do more to meet the Paris Agreement commitments and to invest in low carbon economy, low carbon energy, environmental friendly infrastructure, and innovative solutions that will help our common sea clean, help keep our common sea clean, our people and livelihoods safe from extreme weather, and create new jobs in pioneering sectors. The European Green Deal, the flagship of the von der Leyen Commission, is a unique green recovery model, which is relevant for the southern neighborhood if adapted to local circumstances. Addressing both challenges of enhanced energy security, fighting all types of pollution, and protecting our Mediterranean common goods will have to be adapted to partners' diverse endowments, characteristics, and needs. And fifthly, we should highlight the importance of peace and security in reinforcing the region's resilience. As a trusted actor, the EU is well placed to bring together different stakeholders to dialogue on strategic issues, reduce tension, and contribute to conflict resolution efforts. We reaffirm our commitment to a revitalized, rules-based system with the United Nations as its core. Major security threats such as terrorism, radicalization, cyber and hybrid threats, as well as organized crime, including trade in illegal firearms, trafficking in human beings, drug trafficking, affect both sides of the Mediterranean and should therefore be addressed jointly. Peace is an essential precondition to prosperity. Communicating on our commitment and effort is important too. We need to boost awareness, raising communication efforts as highlighted in the EuroMed survey. One of the lessons from the pandemic has been that our societies are as strong as the weakest link. On that basis, we need to operationalize our new agenda for the Mediterranean by putting people, especially young people, at the center of our policy design and implementation. We have the tools, we have the ambition, and now we need everybody's political will to join us and build resilience together. I'm looking forward to your ideas how to best operationalize the new agenda for the Mediterranean. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you very much, really, Director General. I think that your presentation will be, as I said at the beginning, inspiring for all members of EuroMeSCo, and we will start our discussions. Thank you very much, really, for being with us. We hope that the message of all our discussions will reach the institutions as you have been asking for. Thank you very much. And now I have the honor to pass the floor to the moderator of the continuation of the first session, Kurt De Beef, who, as you know, will be the moderator and is the editor-in-chief of the EU Observer. So, Kurt, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to the EuroMeSCo Annual Conference. This conference offers a platform for an inclusive debate about how to shape and implement the new agenda for the Mediterranean, of which Mr. Popowski has given his explanation. Today, we will not discuss the past, but the future, Our aim is to explore how to make flourish the cooperation between the Southern Mediterranean and the EU, despite these difficult times. As a matter of fact, the EU is discussing this cooperation with its governmental partners right now, and is also planning its budget for the coming years. So here today, we have a golden opportunity to contribute to these debates, and therefore, more than ever, all operational ideas and concrete suggestions are welcome. Today we will have 4 panels. In each panel, one speaker will introduce an issue of each pillar of the joint communication. Then, 2 speakers will go deeper into 2 strategic issues of each pillar. They will talk no longer than 5 minutes each. Then we will have 10 minutes in each panel for questions and comments. I invite all participants to write your comments or questions in the chat, in English or in Arabic, as this event is interpreted in both languages. Please direct your questions to one specific speaker. And please keep your questions in the chat short and straight to the point. It is also possible to address comments to one of the EU representatives. We will make sure that these will be sent directly to them. And in her conclusions, Henrik Troutman may also come back to some of the comments you have made. At the end of the event, after the concluding words from Josep Ferrer, a pop-up message will appear on your screen to evaluate the event. Before you leave the event, please take 5 seconds to answer this very short and simple question. If, for some reason, you have to leave earlier, no worries, you will receive the evaluation form also by email. Let me now start with the first panel. The first panel is on green transition, climate resilience, energy, and environment. The overview will be given by Marc-Antoine Eyl-Mazzega, Director of the Center for Energy at the French Institute for International Relations. Then the focus will be brought by Tayyip Amrgroot, Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South, on boosting sustainable investments, a key to green transition, to be followed by Maciej Al-Naber, Team Leader and Senior Researcher at the West Asian North Africa Institute, and he will be talking about promoting green transition and fighting climate change. It all starts with local communities. So now I give the floor to Marc-Antoine Eyl-Mazzega. Please, you have 5 minutes for your overview. Thank you.
Many thanks. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to address such a distinguished audience. And I'd like to congratulate the organizers for this very timely discussion, because indeed, the Mediterranean is our common treasure. Neighbors from the European Union in the south and in the east of the Mediterranean are extraordinarily close to us. And we have to do more to avoid spoiling this common treasure and to foster the integration of our markets, of our policies, their coordination, and to avoid that the carbon wall is being established between the European Union, that is aiming for climate neutrality now by 2050, and our neighbors in the south and the east of the Mediterranean. It was mentioned already, the situation in the Mediterranean is much worse in terms of warming and impacts than the world average, because we are already in that region at 1.5 degrees average temperature increase versus an average of 1.1 degrees for the world. You all probably live around the Mediterranean, and you know that the summer months are longer, that water scarcity is a major issue. So now is definitely time to act. The problem I see is that all in all, we're talking here about 300 million people living outside the EU around the Mediterranean. Those emit about 1 gigaton of CO2 per year. And I see many, many places, easy picks, where these emissions can be decreased at low cost, and often at a much lower cost than in the European Union. And so let me give you a couple of examples. There is still too many fossil fuel subsidies around the Mediterranean. It's just incredible. Remember 2010, the G20 convened in Pittsburgh saying we have to start a process globally to phase out fossil fuel subsidies. Well, around the Mediterranean in the south, there's still too many around. It's one of the worst places on earth in terms of fossil fuel subsidies. There's been good progress made in Egypt, for example, with pressure from the IMF, or let's say accompanied by the IMF, but some progress also in Morocco. But unfortunately, there is still too many problems in that respect. And now is the time to really address this, because those subsidies can be effectively transferred to low carbon technologies. The second point is energy efficiency. Energy policies in the region are too much supply side driven, not enough demand side driven. And the very start is reduce inefficient energy consumption, work on energy sobriety. There's plenty of opportunities, very inexpensive, very easy to reap. The third point is the situation of electricity emergency that we've seen in many countries, which have faced soaring electricity needs. And of course, the easy solution has been, unfortunately, coal. But it's a fact. It was cheap, quickly available, finance was not an issue, etc. Now, we really have to work towards ending any new coal power project in the region. And I'm especially thinking here about Turkey, Egypt. That can't be anymore. And we are really lucky that solar plus battery, wind, and possibly also nuclear are really much more competitive and massively available for large-scale deployment. So in a way, good that not so much was done in the time 2010, 2015. That would have cost a lot of money, but now these technologies are mature and can be deployed at large scale. And I think there's very good cases, Morocco, for example, but also Egypt, Turkey in many aspects, where there's been very successful deployment. Another aspect that is that really matters is if you want to be successful in deploying large scale low carbon energy solutions for your electricity system, you have to integrate the electricity markets with your neighbors. And I see too little efforts there. It's just incredible to see that north of the Mediterranean, you have the most integrated electricity system in the world, and south of the Mediterranean, countries are operating in silos. This is just a huge waste of opportunities, because if you want to improve energy security, if you want to reduce cost and build a very efficient grid, you need to integrate. Another point is related to cities, sustainable cities. There's a huge number of cities across the Mediterranean, and there's so much more that can be done there using modern solutions, building on data. And it was mentioned before, the digital transformation goes hand in hand with the energy transformation. And so a focus on public transport, cooling system, adaptation, which is going to be essential in the region, and building the skills is tremendous. And here I see that the EU and the region should work together. There is definitely not enough foreign direct investments flowing from the European Union to these countries, to our neighbors in the south or in the east of the Mediterranean. The investment volumes are just too slow, and this is clearly a sign that the investment framework and conditions in the region need to be further improved. A last point, or two last points. One on the action of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which plays a very important role because it has a tremendous expertise and knowledge on how best to develop and deploy these technologies and how best to support them. And I wish that all the countries south and east of the Mediterranean join the EBRD and let it operate in their countries. And regrettably, there's still a couple of holes in the racket here. Last point on hydrogen, before I finish. This is the buzzword these days in the European Union and elsewhere in the world. What worries me a bit is that when we look from the European Union perspective to neighbors in the south, thinking, well, we're going to invest in large-scale electrolyzers there and import hydrogen, I think it's just the wrong approach, because we first need to really fix the problems and reap the full opportunities for these countries themselves before having strategies whereby we will invest there just to get out whatever gases in whatever form, hydrogen, ammonia, or directly electricity. Now, there's so many priorities and so many more important things to be solved in the region directly before the European Union should come and seek to reap the benefits from particular particular circumstances or technologies that you could install there. So in a couple of words, here are my key points, and I'm very, very happy that this discussion takes place today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marc-Antoine. Before I give the word to Tayyip Amegroup, please put your questions into the chat form. So a few have already come in, so do not hesitate. Tayyip Amegroup, I'll give the floor to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And thanks for the opportunity to be part of this discussion or exchange. To achieve the goal of a climate-friendly transition, the global community is required to massively invest in transforming our energy systems and cities and transportation, food systems, etc. Public investment will certainly not suffice, and private investors will have to step in to finance this rather unprecedented attempt to completely reshape our economies. For instance, a recent joint work carried out by the Policy Center for the New South and Enel, the Italian utility, estimated that in case of Morocco, the additional cumulative costs, i.e. direct investments of a green development strategy, which goes beyond the conditional indices, is in the region of $275 billion. That's roughly $10 billion per year in the next 30 years. So clearly the government and public funds would struggle in case of Morocco to foot the bill. So obviously, in addition to the traditional support of IFIs and development agencies, other less common or widely used tools, especially in the southern border of the Mediterranean region, are to be explored. By that I mean fiscal policies like carbon taxation, carbon pricing, and issuance of green bonds offer alternatives, obviously. Carbon taxation, in my view, can be used effectively to initiate changes in behavior. Revenues from this taxation could be used to shield vulnerable communities from the short-term impact of higher fossil fuel prices, or to reduce taxes that are incompatible with the objectives of sustainability. The private financial sector must clearly play a much bigger role in case of Northern African countries. A recent study on the panorama of climate, or the landscape of climate investments in Morocco during the last 10 years found that more than 70% of investments in climate-tagged initiatives or projects are conducted by the government, while the contribution of the local private banking sector or local financial institutions is less than 20%. So in my view, crafting the right environment to boost the share of the local private financial institutions and shifting some of the international financial institutions' support to this to boost this involvement of the local banking sector is essential, I think. I can think, for instance, I can think of blended finance, where commercial financing is blended with concessional funding provided by development partners. I can think of guarantee mechanisms, etc., etc. Before handing over, I should also mention that climate adaptation is not getting enough traction or attention when it comes to financing. And some of the EU and IFI support should go to devising innovative financial solutions to mobilize the significant financial resources required to deal with the consequences of climate change, droughts, at least in the southern part of the Mediterranean and large parts of Africa, food insecurity, climate-related natural disasters, which obviously are extremely important issues when dealing with the political stability and immigration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tayyip. I'll give the floor now to Maciej Al-Naber on the promoting green transition.
Thank you very much. Good morning, dear experts and colleagues. Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Maciej Al-Naber, team leader and senior researcher for the Sustainable Development Pillar at West Asia North Africa Institute. I'm honored to participate at the EuroMeSCo annual event. My intervention will be around the importance of including local communities in fighting climate change to promote green transition. How we can include them? Why is this important? What tools can be used and what is missing? And how the EU can contribute in this regard. Climate change in the EU southern countries has been increased during the past couple of years. This has been witnessed through rainfall variation, increasing in temperature, increase in weather-related hazards, intensity as drought, frost condition, and flood events, which have caused tremendous economic and social challenges. Local communities with low adaptive capacity are the most vulnerable and affected by these events. Some of the communities had lost their houses, jobs, source of income, and some had to migrate internally or externally to a less affected area. So the question that raises itself now, what can be done to increase the local community resilience toward climate change? As it's well known, the EU southern partner countries are not carbon emitter compared to industrial countries. So more focus should be done on pumped toward adaptation capacity comparing to the mitigation capacity. So what is needed to be done at community level again? Most of government, not only community, doesn't consider climate change or do not consider climate change as a priority, especially in a region faced a lot of conflict and political tension. So first of all, there is an urgent need to add climate change on our national priorities. These priorities should be defined based on the most urgent environmental challenge at the sub-national level, not only national level, but also sub-national level coming from the local communities themselves. The challenges shall be defined based on the local needs and including the communities through surveys, questionnaires, roundtable meeting, and policy dialogue, and support them to include the policy dialogue and policy advocacy to enhance green transition. If you want to create a change in any nation, you need to educate them. From our extended experience working with community-based organizations and individuals at local community level, it has become apparent that the environmental awareness and knowledge are lacking. The local community was not fully aware of how to draw a connection between local environmental hazard and climate change. Accordingly, the initial step shall start with capacity building, including climate change education in the school curriculum, building the community's environmental ownership, leadership, and responsibilities can be built through providing them with the right tools and skills to disseminate the adequate environmental, technical, and theoretical information to the rest of the society. Nonetheless, awareness and knowledge on climate change between the different levels of the community need to be mainstreamed, and trust building between different actors need to be enhanced. And I think it's it is something essential to start thinking how we can build the trust between the different level of the community, bottom up, bottom, from the users up to policymaker, and goes on. So the EU can help in mainstreaming climate change and the importance of green transition by supporting the local stakeholder and conducting projects tackles their urgent environmental need through financial support, field training, as well as well-defined priorities that are aligned with the national priorities, taking into account the inclusiveness approach, and for sure the youth inclusiveness and the gender inclusiveness. Last but not least, the momentum has been increased over the years for the local community to be fully engaged and aware of their role as agent of change. Hence, the civil society organization as community-based organization can provide the needed on-the-ground monitoring effort. On the other hand, more progress is needed on the involvement of private sector in climate resilience, as their role can provide the needed sustainable financial mechanism for local vulnerables and rural community to increase their vulnerability and to decrease their vulnerability and increase their resilience towards climate change. I will stop here and I'm available for any questions, comments for further discussion. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your explanation, Majd. We have time left for one question, actually, and the question is for Marc-Antoine. So the question is, what are the concrete obstacles in the development of a structure to produce and distribute hydrogen? If possible, to answer this question in 2 minutes, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Good, I'll try. With pleasure. Look, the point is the following. The key advantage that you have south of the Mediterranean, but actually also in Spain and Portugal, is that you can have extremely cheap electricity from solar and from wind. So you can have a pretty good load factor as well for your electrolyzer. So you have cheap electricity, A, and B, a good load factor for your electrolyzer. So that, in principle, enables you to really reduce the cost, the production cost of green hydrogen. The problem that you have is that you need water in large volumes, and you need to purify that water, and you have to do this in an environmentally sustainable manner. That is not, for example, rejecting all the salt in the seawater at the same place in order where you could destroy biodiversity, and not in competing with other uses of water, such as agriculture, for example. The second point is investment costs. Because of the higher political risk, because of the lower rule of law quality that you find in the region, investment cost will actually be higher, and these are not properly assessed as we speak. So there's a lot of hype, but not enough focus on that. The third point is, once you have your hydrogen produced, say in Morocco, in Algeria, the question is, how do you bring it to Europe or to other markets if you don't use it locally? Well, liquefying and cooling hydrogen and shipping that in a ship, such as an LNG tanker, which would be a hydrogen tanker, comes with huge cost and is technically not feasible now as we speak. Nobody knows how to do that, right? The second point is, what you could do is you could put this hydrogen in pipelines that already exist, but this will come with investment costs, such as new compressor stations, and etc. And so, transporting hydrogen via pipeline makes more sense than via ships, but it comes with costs and problems as well. The third point is what you could do is actually produce ammonia, and ammonia can be shipped more easily. But the fundamental point is, I think one should really think in your region, south of the Mediterranean, one should really think, why don't I produce this hydrogen or this ammonia and use it myself, for example, for iron ore reduction, for example, in the fertilizer sector, for example, in the wider steel sector, etc., so that I can have much more added benefits and added value. And actually, you can compete with our aluminium smelters that we have, with our steel production that we have here, etc., etc. And the condition for this to be effective is, get the investment framework much more attractive, much more stable, improve rule of law, and all this will happen in the next 10 to 15 years. So tremendous opportunities, but the conditions need to be right. I hope I managed to do this explanations in 2 minutes.
I see that we lost the moderator. I'm Emmanuel Cohen-Hadria from the IEMed, the European.
Thank you so much.
Oh, the moderator is back.
Type and match panel. Let's go. And to the second panel on religion. The overview will be given in the Middle East. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Now, yes.
Go on.
But yes, we had 5 seconds of troubles, but now the connection seems to be better again. Okay, while we are fixing the connection of the moderator, let me maybe open the floor for the second panel.
Tunisian startup.
Well, there, but we cannot hear you. Go ahead, please. Kurt.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So let me start again. So excuse me for this interruption. So the second panel on resilience, prosperity, and digital transition. The overview will be given by Katarzyna Sidlo, Director of the Middle East and North Africa Department at the Center of Social and Economic Research. And the focus will be brought by Amel Saidan, President of Tunisian Startups, co-founder of BetaQ. She will be talking about digital transformation in the Southern Neighbourhood. And the last intervention on this panel will be given by Farah Al-Shami, Research Fellow in Beirut of the Arab Reform Initiative on promoting investments to boost inclusive and sustainable economies. I'll give the floor to Katarzyna Sidlo.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to participate in yet another EuroMeSCo Annual Conference. So the pillar I'm going to talk about, the strengthening resilience, building prosperity, and seizing the digital transition. It really does cover a really broad variety of issues linked to sustainable development. Now, on the one major point that is being covered, digitalization, what I think the pandemic really showed us is that, where there's a will, or rather where there's a necessity, there really is a way. And what we've been witnessing is speeding up of digitalization processes in both public and private sectors throughout the region. So it is really crucial that we do not lose this momentum. And this is why it's really great that the communication puts so much emphasis on digital transition. Equally, I think it's really good that there's a lot of mention about improvement of the business climate. This is something that really has been on the agenda for years and years now. But little progress have been made in most countries in the region. Without working on this, it's going to continue to be challenging to attract investment. And it's going to be really difficult to make use of those opportunities that everybody is talking about nearshoring or reshoring of the EU production to the MENA region. Because in reality, no matter how much us researchers and policymakers are talking about the opportunity to move the production, it's the companies themselves that make the decision to invest in a given country or not. So improvement of business climate, strengthening good governance are really absolutely key in that sense. Now, there are a couple of issues that I think the communication could be a little bit less vague about. One of them is trade. So what we do read is that the communication promises to give priority to reduction of non-tariff barriers and trading costs, which is great because those are one of the crucial things that actually the recently released final report on the evaluation of EuroMed free trade agreements has been really underlining that are important to tackle. But what I think is lacking is really emphasis on strengthening a beneficial and balanced trade relationship and tackling the issues as trade in agricultural goods that's been really problematic for some time. A strong trade relationship is really key for overall strong relationship between the EU and the Mediterranean partner countries. And equally, it would be important to mention EU support to strengthening the regional trade integration. Second thing that I thought, or I hope would be featuring more prominently in the communication is something that actually Mr. Popowski did mention in his presentation, but is only briefly mentioned in the communication itself. And this is women's economic empowerment. Again, a topic that has been brought on and on and on in various documentation during various conferences, but little has changed throughout time. Over the past 15 plus years, really, female economic participation rates in the MENA region have not really gone up. They remain one of the lowest in the world. The gender gap in the labor force participation still exceeds 50 percentage points in most countries in the region. And during the pandemic, as one of the spillovers, it's been mostly women who have been dropping out of the labor market altogether or losing their jobs. So again, this is something that I thought should be mentioned more prominently. Same situation with young people. Again, mentioned a lot by Mr. Popowski, but under this particular pillar, young people are only very briefly mentioned. And without improving their situation and their outlook for the future, there really cannot be any mention of prosperity, resilience, or sustainability. So overall, I think that the goals and action points that are listed under the second pillar of communication are quite ambitious, but not completely unrealistic, as long as both sides really do endeavor to achieve them. And to that end, I think the approach that is outlined in the communication, to the effect that the EU support will be provided based on commitment to reforms from the side of the partner countries, this is really sensible. Again, as long as this is really put in place. So to sum up, transparency, accountability, and giving really a lot of attention to good governance are the overarching things that will be necessary in order to support things like digitalization, improvement of business climate, and so on. I'm over my 5 minutes now, so I will stop here and I'll be happy to address any questions later on during the discussion.
Thank you very much, Katarzyna. I'll give the floor to Eyl-Mazzega, please.
Thank you, Kurt. I'll be trying to highlight how, in my opinion, the Southern Neighborhood hasn't shared the same pace of evolution in digital transformation as the rest of the world. So we have mentioned many times that the world has seen an acceleration of the adoption of digital technologies and the transformation of the society, of economy, and of policies thanks to digital, thanks to the COVID crisis, maybe an acceleration of 3 to 5 years. This pace, is, in my opinion, hasn't been shared by the Southern Neighborhood. I might be sharing more insights from the Tunisian perspective as I'm actually active on the field there. And so I think Tunisia has made the headlines very often lately around when it comes to innovation, when it comes to startups. However, we feel like there is a need to unblock this acceleration of digital transformation. What was good also about the COVID crisis, that it has magnified the gaps that we are seeing here, that we are. And the challenges we're having in the Tunisian economy and society when it comes to digital transformation. So when we mention challenges, we can think of a lack of a clear vision how to position Tunisia, for instance, and the countries in the Maghreb region, for instance, as champions, as real digital transformation champions. This has been, of course, amplified by the challenge of the need to manage a duality of economic challenges, democratic transition, and then the pressure to find effective ways to innovate and to implement a proper and design a proper digital transformation. Other challenges like antiquated legal framework. The legal framework is extremely behind when it comes to the needs and requirements of a proper digital transformation. So I'm co-creating startups as part of the work I'm doing in BERAQ, but I'm also supporting startups in the ecosystem, and I'm seeing that most of their brains and time is spent around finding workarounds to find ways around the legal frameworks that are in place and that are not adequate for this type of for the new world of work and for this type of transition. Other challenges are related to the youth and the raw talent. Talent is there, but it's just not channeled to the right direction. It's not leveraged in the way it should be, and this is where this is generating frustrations and lack of trust. And this is where we come to the digital transformation of the society and the need of this of a sustainable digital transformation. And when we speak about trust, it's about a transparent sharing of information. It's about dialogue. Youth is so the young people in the southern neighborhood is properly equipped when it comes to digital tools and solutions, and they they are more than open for exchange with the policymakers. One important pillar of the transformation and the challenges in our countries is actually the SMEs. The economies are based on SMEs, and if these do not transform properly, we have a real economic challenges. We are noticing today a lack of leadership and capabilities when it comes to adoption and implementation of digital transformation within these SMEs. So these SMEs are still competing the traditional way. One of the projects I'm driving, for instance, in collaboration with the EBRD, is actually building a platform that can accelerate the digital transformation of SMEs by creating a new dynamic. So this is where we need really to be innovative about the approaches and the ways we address this digital transformation. So maybe to one key and fundamental question: why do we need actually an agenda in the Mediterranean? Why do we need a collaboration in the Mediterranean? So I think the world is noticing today a new change in paradigms, the shift of powers. The power is with the geographies, I would even say, who hold the data and the large platforms. And the platforms can only be meaningful if they are big enough and they have enough data. So we're talking now about the Chinese platform, the US platforms, but we might need to think seriously of creating some regional digital platforms, be it for whatever solution, payment, mobility, what have you. So the digital transformation applies to all sectors of our lives. The new world of work. The new world of work is one of the focus areas we should really look at in our region, because we will need to be creative about the way we collaborate, the North-South collaboration when it comes to a workforce. So I'm part of a project that was in collaboration with the German corporation, for instance, about how to open the German markets for IT capabilities in Tunisia. The project is called Tech 216, and the idea is actually to see how we can collaborate while having people staying in their home countries, because they want to stay. They don't want to move unless if they have the possibility to have the proper work opportunities and dignity and career evolution. So I think it's really time for big, bold moves when it comes to designing the collaboration, when it comes to implementing and testing new ideas. When we speak about digital, we speak about leapfrogging. The southern neighborhood does not have actually enough legacy that justifies incremental change. And we are noticing in countries like Tunisia that incremental change is by far not sufficient. This is not enough. So we need the big jumps, we need the big moves. Today, I'm part of a network that's called the Digital Arabia Network. We're trying to assess actually the level of maturity, digitalization, the show blockers of digitalization in the countries of the southern Mediterranean. This is maybe where we might need to join the efforts in order to assess, so that we can really build proper policies and approaches. So yeah, just to close with that, I think the theme of the annual meeting this year is just amazing. It's about building resilience together, and I think there is no better way to build resilience if we don't collaborate together. Maybe I just add one last point that was highlighted by Katarzyna, but I think this is we never highlight it often enough. It's the role of women in this transition. So the role of women in the post-COVID or in this COVID management crisis. So when we see that 84% of the national COVID response task forces are actually male, this means that we are designing today a male dominated COVID response when it comes to digital, but also to economic transition. So the question is, how can we make sure that women are part of the design, but also part of the implementation of the digital transformation and the post-COVID transformation in the northern and southern neighborhood, and especially designing the collaboration. Kurt, I don't know if he...
If Kurt is not here, I will pass the floor to the second speaker of this panel that is looking into one particular issue. Obviously, the digital transformation is a very strong one in the communication, but the issue of inclusiveness is also new. You have a new language in the communication on inclusiveness, on the social dimension of the partnership, and that's exactly what our second speaker will be looking at. Her name is Farah Al-Shami. Thanks a lot for being with us. Farah, you are a research fellow at the Arab Reform Initiative, also a very active member in the network. Farah, the floor is yours for 4 or 5 minutes max. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and many thanks for the invitation, and I am very honored to be among you today. My presentation, I will try to make it as comprehensive as possible. It will revolve around the first pillar among the 4 pillars of work around which digital transformation efforts are structured in the EU Joint Communication on the renewed partnership. And that's given the importance of digital transition in promoting economic resilience and prosperity and inclusiveness, indeed, especially nowadays amid the global pandemic, as my colleague Amal just mentioned. And this pillar of work is actually governance, policy, and regulatory frameworks. And here I would like to begin by focusing on a key element of intersection between this pillar and some of the actors and beneficiaries identified by this new development agenda, and that are put at the heart of this potentially mutually beneficial cooperation, which are youth and women. And this issue of focus is like actually mainly reforms on the level of the informal sector, since informal employment as a percentage share of total employment ranges between 39 and 82% in the Arab region, according to Viego's data. And because youth and women are not only two of the most vulnerable and marginalized social groups in the region, but also two of the most involved groups in informal employment, whose participation can be as high as 70 and 80% for women and youth, respectively, according to the ILO. These social segments are actually in dire need for full access to essential services, to finance, and most importantly, to economic opportunities and to the labor markets. And while flexible labor markets in the informal sector can actually generate more jobs for youth and women, as this means less barriers to entry and less tax liabilities for them, the European Commission should further emphasize the importance of providing them with decent work conditions, which include a minimum wage, social insurance coverage, and other basic benefits. This means developing a legal framework that is specific to informal labor and that nearly formalizes them in terms of access to decent work conditions, but without making them bear unnecessary tax burdens, for instance, that they actually do not owe in practice given their age group or given their unpaid care work at home. The digital economy, more particularly, is a key entry point for more job creation for youth and women in the informal sector, especially nowadays in the challenging COVID times again. However, there are important challenges that arise from this work modality in particular and the level of informality that it entails. Here again, the legal framework should include digital work and components that organize e-taxation, e-commerce, among other e-features, in a way that ensures justice for all and prevents any macroeconomic repercussions at the same time. Multilateral and bilateral efforts should therefore help the Mediterranean further invest in their infrastructure that is related to the knowledge economy, such as the internet and telecommunication across rural and urban areas equally. This is imperative for more sustainable and universal opportunities that help women and youth develop their SMEs, pursue their entrepreneurial plans, unlike the narrow, targeted, and temporary microfinancing programs and the policies that are oriented towards job creation, but without taking into consideration the specific needs of vulnerable social groups. And while attempting to promote economic diversity, integration, and inclusiveness with good infrastructure, the European Commission should not overly focus on education, which covers the labor supply side, but as well on matching such policies with the conditions imposed by the labor demand side in order to complement the job creation-oriented macroeconomic policies. And now, from a more meta-analytical perspective, structural economic imbalances in the Mediterranean ought to be resolved with policies that are based on the principle of resource redistribution instead of revenue mobilization. And that's speaking about the fiscal space section in the EU joint communication document. As for trade, global values chains should be restructured indeed, especially now amid COVID. But that should be away actually from the DCFTAs, from the deep and comprehensive free trade agreements, and the conditionality packages that they come with, as we are seeing now in Morocco and Tunisia. Because these conditionality packages are actually making countries of the global south lose their competitive advantage in front of their counterparts. Encouraging investments should not it should also not only mean handing, or not mean at all actually, handing the provision of essential services over to the private sector by following the World Bank's cascade approach. And it does not mean allowing loopholes that give business owners the chance to evade their corporate social responsibilities. Investment where equality and of opportunities and outcomes prevail is one of the key solutions for preventing brain drain actually among youth, and for preventing other dropout phenomena among youth and women who should be seen as important economic capitals. Now I'm going to end on this note. Like, while a major progress has been actually achieved so far in mainstreaming gender in national public policies, the mainstreaming of youth in national policies remains insufficient. More so, there isn't any set mechanism for youth participation and engagement in the decision-making on the level of the new agenda for the Mediterranean. And while doing such mechanisms, while establishing them, while trying to mainstream youth policies, we should not see youth as, we should first support youth in creating their collective agencies. And the new agenda should try to meet their expectations and their aspirations while not perceiving them as actors of the future or as agents of change, but as economic agents of today that can produce only when provided with their needs. And this all begins by trying to understand their understanding and their definition of a legitimate space, of success, of social justice, of reforms, of all these terms that that are not jargon terms. Those are essential terms, but those are big terms at the same time. And youth have their own understanding, their own definition of these. We should try to understand that to be able to respond to their needs and to make sensitive, socially sensitive policies that respond to youth and to women equally. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, both speakers, and actually 3 speakers for this panel. Very useful points indeed. I'd like to tell everyone that we get a lot of comments, questions coming in. I can assure everyone that we carefully store them and we will channel them. Also, we cannot deal with all of them at the moment. Let me maybe put 2 of them to the panelists in particular. There is one question to Amel. Amel, the question is how to collaborate with the bank and change legislation from that may be outdated to some extent in Tunisia. That's one of the question. And the other one is in particular on the role of youth. As Maciej Popowski pointed out, young people make up half of the population in our Mediterranean region. If we want our societies and economies to effectively make a green and digital transition, what are the priorities in terms of education and fostering civic engagement among youth? What is the role of educational stakeholders? So thanks a lot to the participants for this for all these comments and questions. Please, Amel and Farah, maybe could you answer really briefly, and then we'll move to the next panel. The speakers are already set.
Thank you, Emmanuel. This is an amazing question because the banking sector, the financial services sector in Tunisia is actually an amazing illustration of how closed the legal system, or how protected this financial services ecosystem feels actually when it comes to digital transformation. There is absolutely no need for innovation, no pressure to transform, because this is a closed ecosystem and this comfort zone is offered by the regulator and by the isolation of Tunisia from the international monetary scene, actually. This is creating some kind of a fake comfort zone that is making the financial services ecosystem very slow when it comes to adopting innovation and collaborate and coming closer to the startup ecosystem and to the digital innovators, which is pretty unfortunate, actually, because this can be really a serious vehicle of activation of the economic acceleration and transition. So banks might need today, hopefully will be adopting actually new approaches when it comes to redefining their role in the ecosystem. They will have to understand actually that they are brokers of connecting the user to innovative solutions. So there is no legal barrier to start adopting open banking. So they can go right away with testing that, and this can give an edge actually to these banks. So we're seeing a few things moving lately, which is a good sign. However, the world is moving at a much higher pace, and this is where we need a strong push and again the bold, big movements.
Farah, in 1 minute, if you can.
Yes.
And then
yes,
I'll hand over again to Kurt, who is back with us.
So Thank you again. So actually thinking about youth and putting them center stage in any public reforms is indeed very essential, especially in the Mediterranean countries. I mean, we can see now NGOs and civil society organizations trying to offset for the shortfalls and that the government institutions are doing on the level of providing youth with their needs, especially when it comes to education. We can see that they are focusing more on training than education as well, and that's something quite bad. While training is important, also civil society organization, not as part of offsetting governmental efforts, because that's not what they are supposed to do, but in general, they should also focus not only on training, but they should focus equally on education, on mentorship. Now, speaking about education, it should become, public education is something essential, because if we are speaking about inclusive economies, about social justice, education should be made free and available and accessible to all. It should be made available and accessible in rural areas, in urban areas. It should be made free. And part of this is English teaching, not necessarily English, but teaching languages. This is one of the key elements that were identified in one of the big conferences on education, that teaching people English is one key element in empowering youth and in making them, in providing them with one of the essential tools to be able to help themselves get education, to help them get the education that they need. And sometimes it is useful for homeschooling, for self-learning. So teaching languages is essential. We are seeing now going back to civil society organizations because, as I said, I mean, the situation, the fait accompli it is what it is when it comes to governments, to public institutions. We cannot change it, but recommend that more funding can be provided to education, and that free education should be provided to all equally. But going back to civil society organizations who are doing a big effort in training and in education to make up for the shortfalls, indeed, the programs that are being provided on the level of civic engagement, promoting youth political participation, promoting youth efforts in peace building, those are all important. And livelihood programs also are equally important in the cases of in conflict settings in the Arab region, let's say. So thank you. I will stop here.
Okay, thank you so much. So my apologies for this connection problem from Brussels. Let's Research Associate at the Pacte Social Sciences Research Center at the University Grenoble-Alpes on the potential for South-South and triangular cooperation in the field of migration and mobility and what the EU can do about it. And finally, we'll have Jan Schneider, Head of Research Unit, the Expert Council on Migration and Integration, who will talk about a renewed focus on legal pathways in migration partnerships. What can be done? Do not forget, you can still put your questions on the chat. Those we have not time for will still be given to several speakers and might be dealt with later. Mr. Paolo Magri, you have the floor.
Thank you also for the Mr. It's nice to see so many friends. Good morning to everybody. Good morning. Yesterday, preparing for this session, I read again the communication by the High Commissioner on the renewed partnership with the Southern Shore. Since I noticed that I could not remember clearly what it said on migration when I had read it only 2 weeks ago. Why am I telling you something so embarrassing for me? You may think it says a lot on the effect on the pandemic on me and many others, and on the toll that containment measures and virtual meetings are having on all of us. But I think it says a lot on the attention that we, as a policy community, are now devoting to migration. It says a lot on the relevance of our domestic troubles that force us to focus on different topics, different crises, which are diverting our attention from migration. Sure, this was to be expected for several reasons. First, the pandemic disembarked in Europe. Country became even more inward-looking. There were lives to save here now. At the policy level, the launch of the European Commission proposal for a new pact on migration and asylum was pushed back by 6 months. And this was on top of at least a year for a long-delayed proposal. But if you believe that this was all the pandemic doing, well, think again. The other reason that have pushed migration away from the top of our agenda revolve around two long-term trends. The first was the constant failure by European government to strike common ground on policy that did not focus exclusively on deterrence. Sure, all the 27 members of the European Union agree that irregular migration and smuggling should be stopped. But when irregular migrants do arrive in Europe, governments have had a much harder time to find internal solidarity among each other. And the failure of the relocation program is a case in point. And European governments continue to fight on whether and how to foster legal migration channels that can replace irregular ones. Finally, this lack of consensus was facilitated by countries arguing that irregular arrivals are now low. No need to have much policy effort. The illusion seems too old, supported by data. Between 2015 and 2020, irregular migration to Europe has dropped by 90%, the lowest level in a decade. Sure, we have had Turkey threatening to flood with migrants Europe, or Italy stepping up its game and closing its port to NGO ships. But that is a far cry from 2015, and lower irregular migration has allowed many European governments to become complacent. In this session, complacency is exactly the mindset we should avoid. We need solution, and we need to put migration back in our diplomatic agenda when discussing cooperation in the Mediterranean. Mediterranean migration is here to stay. Even as every country closed their borders, we have seen a surge in irregular arrival last year, both through Italy and Spain. And sure, the short-term effect of the pandemic might force potential migrants to stay home, but the economic impact of the pandemic has made matters worse for them and will incentivize future migration. We all know that irregular migration is politically destabilizing. As it draws the attention of policymakers and the public opinion, it makes it harder to focus on other urgent matters of cooperation among countries. And making government of destination countries more wary of cooperation, it risks plunging us into the vicious circle we have seen in recent years. A vicious circle where European countries threaten to cut aid and cooperation, the stick, if migration is not curbed, with very few carrots to make up for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paolo Magri. I give the floor to Sarah Benjamin, please.
Thank you for inviting me to the EuroMeSCo Conference and to introduce me. I am glad to participate to this interesting panel dedicated to migration and mobility. First of all, I will briefly define the two key expressions, South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation. South-South cooperation refers to development cooperation between developing countries of the Global South. It's a tool used in particular by states, international organizations, civil society and the private sector to collaborate and share knowledge, skills, and positive results of initiatives. For its part, triangular cooperation refers to a type of international partnership whose configuration involves three parties corresponding to the North-South-South scheme. A pivotal actor from the South makes use of the expertise it has acquired in a particular field for the benefit of another state or a group of states from the south. The two types of cooperation involves an exchange that can take the form of a transfer of skills or technologies or technical assistance. The cost of this transfer of experience is financed in part or in full by a donor from the north, which may be a country or a group of developed countries or a multilateral organization. These types of cooperation are suggested by the new Agenda for the Mediterranean to further explore cooperation on migration and mobility in order to ensure that migration only takes place in a safe and regular manner. Good practices in migration management are in place in several southern Mediterranean countries, which are better able to accompany and support each other. Global South performers have generally a more comprehensive approach to challenges that Europe may not share. This enables an efficient implementation of programs with better results at a lower cost. So the EU should therefore further encourage, finance, and support this form of cooperation in partnership with international bodies and regional and sub-regional organizations. For example, the African Union, the processes of Rabat and Khartoum are pertinent frameworks to this aim. From my point of view, long-term approaches towards sustainable migration and development outcomes are necessary to promote legal and safe channels for migration and mobility, and to address together the challenges of forced displacement and irregular migration. The aim is to address the root causes of irregular migration while creating the conditions for legal migration and well-managed mobility. To this purpose, the new agenda suggests the adoption of an approach centered around comprehensive, tailor-made, balanced, and mutually beneficial partnerships. These principles are necessary to make the partnership effective. The new agenda for the Mediterranean has also rightly evoked the principle of co-ownership. It's therefore important to translate this into action in the field of migration by moving away from a Eurocentric and security logic. The interests and concerns of the Southern Mediterranean countries must be taken into account at the same level as European concerns in order to truly achieve a mutually beneficial partnership and to transform migration issues from challenges to opportunities. To conclude, I just want to say that South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation are tools created to be used in various fields related to development issues in its global vision. They shouldn't be used for security purposes. And to be effective, mutually beneficial partnerships on migration must benefit countries of origin, transit, and destination, as well as migrants themselves. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think you made a perfect introduction to the next speaker about legal migration. Jan Schneider, floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation to speak at this event and to add some brief thoughts to this very topical debate on migration and mobility. It seems anachronistic maybe to make up our minds about a renewed focus on legal migration pathways to EU member states. As Paolo Magri suggested, the COVID pandemic has hampered, if not even halted, overall mobility. Economies are severely damaged, and it might take years for tourism and trade to pick up again and reach pre-crisis levels. Rather, it is expected that there might be a surge of irregular migration again, as a result of the economic turmoil that a lot of countries are going to slide into. And the main concerns are to counter boat arrivals and losses at sea and to crack down on smuggling. which is no doubt a very important priority of EU migration policy. So we might get to the conclusion that it really seems unnecessary to conceptualize new legal pathways at this moment in time. But I think the opposite is true. I'm really convinced. Against all odds, we should put a lot of effort and foresight right now into the task for us to be able to benefit on the medium and on the long run. This is nothing that will benefit in 1 year. It is something, if we come up with smart concepts and investment right now, there will be a triple win 3 or 4 or 5 years from now. What can be done? I would argue that there is 2 main options from an EU and member state perspective. The first one is to make an inventory and take steps to better seize the potential of already existing legal migration pathways within national policies and making them attractive and accessible for the countries of the Southern European neighborhood. I think at least this is true for Germany. I'm addressing you from Berlin right now. We have a lack of accessibility, be it because the German language is so difficult and there is no proper infrastructure to learn it pre-departure in the countries of origin, or be it because employers in small and medium enterprises in Germany have no means to recruit abroad and match their vacancies to potential candidates in the countries south of Europe. This could be mended with some facilitating measures. Now, the second option would be to establish brand new schemes by partnering up between selected countries. And this is where we expect ideas, moderation, facilitation, and last but not least, budgeting from the European Union, as it was outlined in the new agenda for the Mediterranean. And the migration and mobility pillar within the agenda is very much congruent with the content of the Commission's new Pact on Migration and Asylum, which was introduced last September. But I think overall it is still a bit deficient with regard to concrete suggestions and concepts. And the Commission is planning to launch concepts for talent partnerships very soon. At the same time, EU member states can conceptualize legal migration at various skills levels, including medium-skilled mobility and migration for vocational education and training, VET, a very important part of the game. Finally, for this short intervention, maybe 3 factors, which from my point of view are important to make these upcoming initiatives sustainable and promising. First, make the partnership projects a business case from the very beginning. Get employers and enterprises into the game. Secure sustainable buy-in of those employers, but also of civil society and trade unions. So we should take the current and the projected labor and skills needs in the European economies as a point of departure and as the first criterion for engaging with third countries. At the same time, of course, we have to look at the interest of those third countries in the Mediterranean area, but there is a lot of match in this. Second, we should take a sector-specific approach. We need to focus on resilient and sustainable sectors like the green energy, the digital services, health and nursing, but maybe also construction and engineering, and eventually tourism, to just name a few. As I said, we should take due account of the demographic and labor market structures of countries of origin and their educational and vocational training systems in order to mitigate brain drain and to finally enable skills transfer back to those countries, the development facet of the whole issue. Second point of 3, we should expand our focus from recruiting skilled workers for the European economies to maybe training young talent for work in the European Union, but also for skills and talent transfer back to the countries of origin. This perspective, I think, is still underexposed. We should involve the VET systems and the associated public and private stakeholders in developing those talent partnerships, both in EU member states and abroad. And this could result in recruiting young people who are not yet skilled. They are maybe out of school. They might be 18 to 25 and who could receive vocational training and on-the-job training or upskilling and make them either homegrown skilled workers in the European economies with the perspective of full integration or returning experts. Last point, we should try to scale up and Europeanize promising schemes and practices. And this would mean to come beyond the pilot phases and try to involve more than just 1 or 2 countries in those partnerships. We should try to identify sectors beyond the ICT, which is now the main focus of partnerships and pilot projects, which have the potential for a true European partnership with more than 1 member state, such as agriculture, horticulture, construction, but also the hospitality and tourism services. Developing talent pool approaches across borders would be another option, and to get them in line with third countries in the Mediterranean neighborhood. To sum up, the idea of simply replacing irregular migration by legal migration is still very prominent, although I think we have made some progress away from such very woodcut pictures. And we should really start conceptualizing functioning legal migration channels as an end in itself, primarily for demographic and labor market and sustainable development reasons. And I think this would, in the end, be very much in the spirit of the new agenda, and we should try to follow up with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan. I think that was very clear. I have one question for which you have time. A question that is, I think, important. It could be asked to any one of you, of the three, I mean. But I'll ask the question to Paolo Magri. It's a difficult one. Is the cooperation with authoritarian regimes a sustainable and long-term solution for the migration challenges? And could such cooperation that can empower the authoritarian governments in the southern Mediterranean countries backfire and in the end increase irregular migration? You can answer, I know, for an hour on it. Try to keep it short. Thank you so much.
I wonder why you are asking me. I think it has to do with something which happened by the Prime Minister of Italy and the President of one of our country in the region recently with Turkey. I mean, in the short answer to your question is no. Embarking with regime is not a sustainable solution. The longer but 30-second answer is, but there is no alternative. And we are all doing that. Italy with Libya, Europe with Turkey, and with many others. When the crisis was at its peak, we were all desperate to find solution, and we were not that delicate in sorting out who we were dealing with, knowing at the end that the short answer to your question is no, it's not sustainable in the future.
Thank you very much. That's very clear. Perhaps one short question and for one short answer to Jan Schneider. And the question is, how do we ensure talent partnership does not foster further brain drain from the Mediterranean, southern Mediterranean countries?
Very good question. Thank you. I'll try to answer it briefly. Thoughts on it. And indeed, we have had occasions and some examples where this has happened, particularly in the sector of medical nursing. I recall with Tunisia, there was allegations that actually the programs that Germany was running or has been running for the last 10 years at some point really was taken away qualified, skilled personnel, which could have been needed in the countries of origin, in that case, Tunisia. So we have to apply really the United Nations principles on that of mitigating brain drain, and particularly with the medical professions, not recruiting from areas where medical services are not prevalent enough. On the other hand, framing it positively, EU member states should identify partner countries where there's an overflow of young people. And as I said in my presentation, maybe people without a proper skills education in any certain sector or area already, and try to recruit them for training for the needs professions within Europe. And then see whether these professions could also meet demands in countries of origin. And of course, and as the communication says, this requires a tailor-made approach, and approach which really takes into account the interests of the partner countries in the Mediterranean region.
Thank you so much. I mean, there are a few very other interesting questions, but time says we have to go to the fourth and final panel, the one on human development, good governance, and the rule of law. The overview will be given by Gamal Sultan, Senior Research Fellow at the Al-Ahram Center of Political and Strategic Studies in Cairo. Then Arkan El-Seblani will talk about, he's the head of regional team on anti-corruption and integrity in the Arab countries of UNDP. And he will talk about anti-corruption as a pathway to peace and development. And the final speaker on this panel is Marcus Löwe, senior researcher on transformation and economic and social systems of the German Development Institute. And he will talk about towards a more social and inclusive ENP, how about supporting the upgrade of social protection systems. Gamal Sultan, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thanks for the opportunity. It is. I like to congratulate EuroMeSCo for organizing this one important event against all odds of the pandemic and the immobility that we all suffering. Talking about the human development, good governance, and the rule of law, it is like talking about the conventional wisdom and the software of progress and social and political change. There has been many new issues riding on the agenda, things related to the environment, to the energy issues, to digitalization. But issues of human development and rule of law has been always there, and I think will continue to be with us for years to come. They're very essential and enduring and also difficult to tackle. The range of issues that are covered here is quite broad, actually. To mention some of them, we can the report address issues like health, like education, youth, women, issues of institution, rule of law. Large number of issues actually are included under this broad rubric of human development, rule of law, and good governance. And these are two fundamental issues. And because it is fundamental and broad, it lends itself to more of a declaratory positions and policies rather than to concrete policies and programs of actions. And I think this has been always the challenge dealing with issues of human development and rule of law and governance in general. And this is a challenge that we are facing here. And I think we need some courage to take a further step toward prioritization. All those broad issues are really important, but perhaps maybe some issues are more important than others. I don't have the courage to make such a kind of prioritization, but I think I encourage, I invite my colleagues here to engage in a discussion about if we are to organize those issues in a hierarchical way, in cause-effect design, in things that cause other things to happen. What comes first before others, and how can we turn that into policies, programs, things that can be implemented rather than principles that can be declared. We need some sort of organizing principle rather than listing important issues. Yes, they are all important, but providing some intellectual articulation of what is the organizing principle that brings all those issues together, I think is an intellectual effort that is needed, and I think this could help us prioritize and help us shed light on the more important issues. Among the many issues that are included under this rubric, definitely health is important, particularly in the circumstances of the pandemic. But I think education occupies a very central role in this issue. Education is a transforming process, and I think if we are to enhance, increase, build the capacity of societies in the South, education should be given more priority, more importance, more resources allocated to it. Because if we succeed in addressing and making progress in this issue area, I think it will be more likely to achieve success in other related areas that are issues that are included under our broad rubric of human development, governance, and rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gamal. Let me pass the floor to El-Seblani on a theme, anti-corruption, that has been rising on the agenda certainly since 2011. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I hope you can hear me, and you can hear me well.
Absolutely, yes.
All right. So I would like to apologize ahead of time in case there's a break in the connection. So let me thank you for inviting me and to be part of this very important discussion. On the topic of anti-corruption, the issue of anti-corruption has been for a long time, not only in the region, but at the global level, a taboo issue. And approaches have always been about adopting a more generic approach to promote effectiveness and efficiency in government. But ultimately, these programs always end up facing vested interest and clientelistic networks and end up being undermined. Perhaps this is why decades of investing in governance programming has not really yielded the needed results. The international community and the United Nations has recognized more and more that there needs to be a specific emphasis on anti-corruption programming and anti-corruption support. And this has manifested in two important international frameworks. One is the UN Convention Against Corruption, which entered into force in 2005, so 15 years ago. And if you compare this convention to other international or UN conventions, it's really new. You have human rights conventions and so many other declarations decades before that. So even in the consciousness of the United Nations, this is a relatively recent focus and recent issue. The other framework is the Sustainable Development Agenda, the Agenda 2030. If we are to compare that to the Millennium Development Goals between 2000 and 2015, we see that there is one of the major differences between the two agendas or two sets of development goals is that the Sustainable Development Goals emphasize on governance and particularly on transparency, accountability, and anti-corruption issues. If we are to look at Sustainable Development Goal 16, we see that 4 of the 10 primary targets are dedicated to this area of work. So, in other words, that there is more recognition at the international level that there needs to be specific focus on this issue, yet we don't see programming and support from bilateral partners and multilateral partners keeping up with this. Yes, there are certain breakthroughs and certain initiatives that are underway. So it's very important, I think, to understand the value of this kind of specialized and focused anti-corruption programming. There is, and looking at what is needed in order to do that, there is also the UN Convention and lessons learned from comparative experience also produce an important list of areas that need to be considered. Now in the region, like I said, this has always been a taboo. There has been 2 major milestones that promoted this agenda. You mentioned one, which is the 2011 events, definitely. And another one that preceded that was the advent of the UN Convention, which allowed countries to acknowledge for the first time the problem and start creating frameworks to address corruption problem through anti-corruption agencies and specialized laws. Yes, in the first period, a lot of these ended up being of declaratory nature or have even been dubbed as window dressing. But the momentum created has been very important to create spaces that are needed to introduce concrete responses to this problem. Now, if we look at the corruption problem in the region, international indicators, public opinion, expert opinion, all agree that levels of corruption in the southern neighborhood countries continue to be relatively high to other parts of the world. In some countries, the problem is systemic. It's linked to the political system, the economic model, and weaknesses in formal and informal institutions. And because the problem is systemic and not simply transactional in nature, the responses also need to be systemic. However, looking at the cost of corruption at the region, it's not only billions of dollars lost every year, and there are different numbers. There are some official numbers in certain countries that put the direct cost of corruption at 2 or 3% of GDP. For example, in Morocco and Tunisia, although those are considered to be moderate estimates or conservative estimates. In countries like Lebanon, for example, it has been the cost has been estimated to be close to 17 or 16% of the GDP. So we are talking at major direct financial loss. But what's more important is the indirect cost, which is manifested in terms of the erosion in trust in public institutions and the erosion of the capacity of institutions to implement the law equitably and effectively. So therefore, it's important to understand and promote approaches that draw on these lessons learned from the global experience and from the regional experience. We have seen several initiatives or several measures introduced. For example, access to information, which is critical for transparency and preventing corruption. 10 years ago, only one country in the region had this law, and it was a poor law. Now we have 8 countries that have this in place, and now the emphasis is going to implementation. I want to close, and I know time is limited, by a concrete message. Corruption is knowable. It is not something that is abstract, and maybe it is in the interest of corrupt networks to keep the discussion on anti-corruption abstract. Corruption is knowable. It can be broken down into pieces that need to be put in place. It's like a big puzzle that we cannot eliminate it. It's found everywhere, but there are ways to reduce the space for maneuver. So the first step is to really break down what is needed and create processes and wait for the opportunity and seize the opportunity, because these kinds of reforms are not like in pyramid shape. You put 1, then 2, then 3. It's more like a puzzle, and we need to create processes that live beyond projects and not projectize this kind of work. Processes that are anchored in joint spaces between government, civil society, and others. Even in countries where the civil society is limited, we have seen the ability to create breakthroughs. So I want to close by saying corruption is knowable. It's important to break it down into concrete, concrete achievable measures and create processes that are ready to seize the opportunity once the opportunity presents itself because of political change, economic pressure, or social movements. I'll stop here and I'll be happy to speak more and answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we all support your ambitions to end corruption in the region. I'll now give the floor to Marcus Leuwe about a social and inclusive ENP. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, everybody, for inviting me to this very important event. The communication by DG NEAR on a new agenda for the Mediterranean suggests a very comprehensive strategy of cooperation, and it mentions manifold goals: social inclusion, migration management, security, peace. However, what I'm missing a bit is that it admits also that there can be conflicts between these goals, and it really does not explain how such conflicts can be overcome. Now, with regards to social protection, it is mentioned 3 times in the communication, but without any concretization. Fortunately, there is an action plan coming with the communication suggesting 12 flagship reports, and one of them has a focus on social protection and suggests quite concrete measures in Tunisia, Morocco, and Jordan especially. And these are very good suggestions. MENA countries are spending a quite high share of their GDP on social protection, much more than other countries on the same income level. However, the spending is mainly on subsidies until today and social insurance rather than public health and social transfers. And these are the main kind of instruments that would be the more important ones for lower income groups. So the spending is socially unfair. It benefits the better off much more than it benefits the poor. In addition, it's not efficient because the administration and targeting costs are high and the targeting is really miserable. Errors of exclusion and inclusion are very high. And for both reasons, the social protection schemes are not effective. The effects on reduction of poverty and inequality are really marginal. However, we have to keep in mind these flaws do not come as an accident. In the 1950s and 60s, MENA governments have built up quite a big social protection system, providing transfers and service to all population groups. Later, however, the governments decided to spend a bit more strategically. They started emphasizing on subsidies and transfers and services for those parts of society that are more important for political regime survival than the poor. So formerly populist social contracts became increasingly unsocial. Admittedly, some change came again lately during the corona crisis when all MENA governments increased their social assistance spending. But these changes are not enough. We have to keep in mind that the pandemic itself and the measures taken against it have hit hard the populations in MENA countries, not only in health terms. Many people in the region have lost their jobs, and even more have perhaps not lost their jobs, but lost large parts of their income. They just have to continue doing the jobs even if they don't generate any income. And this is especially true for the informal economy. So social protection should target much more low-income workers in the informal economy. However, I see the problem that once the pandemic is over, MENA governments might not have interest any longer in such a reform. Their short-term interest is probably still in satisfying the needs of those parts of society that are important for regime survival. Army, bureaucrats, bourgeoisie, not the poor. So I see 3 or 4 issues that European neighborhood policies in the domain of social protection can and should do. First, argue that on the longer run, pro-poor reforms in social policy and elsewhere are crucial for social cohesion and political stability, and thus in the interest of all actors, including the MENA governments themselves. ENP should provide MENA governments with all kinds of support that they might need and not have themselves for reform implementation. And ENP should offer incentives for MENA governments to embark on the dearly needed reforms, promise financial support once proper social policy reforms have been implemented. And finally, ENP should help MENA countries mobilize the resources that they need for reform through shifts in government budgets and through tax reforms, shifting tax burden from consumers to income earners. Because so far, many high-income people in MENA countries pay hardly any taxes at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marcus Leeuwen. It's my honor, I think, to pick the last question of the day. A lot of the other remarks, don't doubt about it, will be sent to the speakers and will also be taken away by the EU representatives. But this question actually goes on, is about anti-corruption, Arkan. And I know you're not EU official, but still the question is the anti-corruption and good governance approach acting as an alternative and replacement to the democratic reforms approach? And if yes, does it mean that there is a shift in the EU foreign policy, as you see or not see, approach in the Mediterranean and southern neighboring countries? Don't forget to yes.
Yes, thank you for the question. And as you indicated, I'm not in a position to speak on behalf of the EU, but I don't think that we are seeing a shift necessarily, and it's not necessarily a mutually exclusive approach, neither should it be. True evidence doesn't show a causal linkage between corruption and democracy. There is a correlation, of course, and that's why we shouldn't really consider this as a mutually exclusive approach. But unfortunately, democratic reforms have always been undermined by clientelistic networks and vested interest in corruption. And therefore, expecting that democracy can be promoted simply through investing in elections is not necessarily a recipe for success. It's really important to understand that there are levers in any system, informal and informal institutions, that create drivers for corruption, which ultimately undermine governance and democratic reforms. So that's why the recommendation or the consideration today is to really promote a complementary approach, and not to expect that simply by investing in democratic reforms, we will necessarily have the impact that we need on the economy or on the effectiveness of the governance system. So I would say that at this point, this is not a mutually exclusive engagement, but rather should be a complementary one, looking at how the two types of approaches can complement each other rather than looking at them in a linear way.
Thank you very much. I would like to conclude the panels by saying that some comments were really saying how interesting your remarks all were. And as myself being working for years and on the Eastern Mediterranean, I want to thank you so much, all of you, for this absolutely fascinating, important and inspiring debate. And I'm absolutely sure that many of the comments of the panelists, but also from the audience, will be taken into account by the EU in shaping its Mediterranean policy. We are now coming to the conclusions by Henrik Troutman and Josep Ferrer. As you will see, one last remark, is an evaluation form will appear as a pop-up window at the end of the event. Please take 5 seconds to give your opinion. And if that doesn't work for one reason or another, don't worry, it will be sent to you also by email. So let me just announce the last two speakers for today. The first one is, as said, Henrik Troutman, who is the acting director, Neighbourhood South, for the Directorate-General for Neighbourhood and Enlargement Negotiations at European Commission. She will give some words, say some words about the next steps towards the new agenda implementing the joint communication. And the final conclusion will be given by Josep Ferrer, Director-General of the European Institute of the Mediterranean, with the title, An Inclusive and Operational Contribution, Kicking Off the Country Debates. Thank you very much for your participation, and it's my pleasure and honor to give the word to Henrik Troutman, please.
Thank you very much, Cord, and thanks a lot to everybody who participated in this very important conference today. We've been listening with great interest, and there were a lot of very specific suggestions coming from the different speakers and also the audience. And that's extremely helpful for our next steps in implementing actually the communication, which after all, and I think it has been said several times, it's a piece of paper, it's a policy paper, but it does have an action plan, it does have flagships, and it does have a drive behind it to really make it more than a piece of paper coming out of Brussels, but really use that as our political framework and discussion framework, including with the governments in the region. So I'm not going to try to seriously sum up all the debates of this morning. I have a couple of points I wanted to come back to briefly, and then tell you maybe a little bit what the next steps are in terms of work in the EU institutions in the next couple of months. So, I mean, as Maciej Popowski said at the beginning, for us it's very important to renew and enhance the dialogue with partners, but also offer concrete action and the flagship projects, the core policy areas, but also balancing ambition with pragmatism. The overall idea is really to be people-centric. That goes from discussion with ministers, but also talking to civil society, talking to the most vulnerable, being in contact with civil society in the next couple of months whilst we launch into the programming. And also bring together all of the new EU toolbox from policy and political dialogue to the different instruments of grants, loans, and guarantees. We have to support our partners, and that will be financed by the NDICI Global Europe Instrument and the EFSD Plus. So we're also getting member states on board of that through the Team Europe approaches, because the EU can't do this alone, and we need some of the more interested and engaged member states in the southern neighborhood to bring the forces together, both financially but also in terms of expertise. That as an overall intro remark, if you want, then maybe a short reaction to the panel one on green transition. Overall, very much in line with our thinking. Very much using, of course, the context of the UFM to support reforms and capacity building, but also try to be proactive in using financial instruments under the EFSD Plus in really getting the funding to some of these good ideas that are coming out of the region. And I just wanted to give you one or two examples. For example, on the regional level, we have a new initiative which is being launched now, which is called Climate for Cities, which tries to bring together municipalities in the southern region in a number of countries with some of the major climate financing that is available on a global level, be it the Green Climate Fund or others, because we have seen in the past that although there's good ideas, it's very difficult to get them to a bankable state. So the point is to really help municipalities, not only on a national level, but also working on a regional level, to be able to implement their projects and to make this connection between a city in Morocco or in Egypt or in Jordan and the banks and the climate funds. There's also a specific window on sustainable cities as part of the EFSD. We're also working with the OECD on the investment climate. And we think some of these aspects could be further strengthened, including civil society and local communities as part of our approach. So thanks a lot for the ideas on that one. Then moving to panel 2 on prosperity and digital transformation. Again, a lot has been said. We know that there's a huge task in front of us, and that's not only for the southern neighborhood, it's also for Europe in parts, and the pandemic has made that very clear. So we have to do more than incremental steps. A lot of new ideas. We think trade and increasing also investment agenda is important, but it also requires move among southern partners towards more regional integration, including on the opportunities that are coming out of digital transformation. This is relatively recent also for our own agenda, but our approach would be to support at country level and mainstreaming across different areas. For example, support digitalization as part of the SME support, or when working with the private sector. The idea of a regional platform is interesting. That's maybe something to be explored in the context of the UFM, where these elements so far are very small, but we should definitely come back to that. On inclusiveness, job creation, and economic empowerment of women and youth, these are really key aspects which we intend to strengthen in the future, including in our dialogues with the partner governments in the region. Now moving to the panel 3, migration and mobility. I mean, there obviously, and it has been said by several speakers, the economic situation and migration are undoubtedly linked in the southern neighborhood. This is why the economic and investment plan has such a strong focus on addressing root causes and really not pushing growth for the sake of growth, but really growth that creates jobs in the region. This will be one of our main elements of future cooperation with the southern neighbors, and it's something that the Commission and also the HRVP and we on a technical level are regularly bringing to the governments. So this is one element that is for us fundamental to everything else we're discussing. Alongside of that, of course, we will enhance border management capacity and improve the efficiency of return and reintegration operations, also because we want to make sure that if there is return, there is a reintegration package available. This is a number of things that we're discussing both with the governments, but also with the governments in Europe, and our colleagues in DG Home, who should make funds available for people who are coming back, to not let them basically come back with nothing, but give them a chance to restart their life. As a follow-up to the communication, we're also in the process of designing a new regional multi-country program on migration for the southern neighborhood, and that should allow us to continue the work done so far under the North Africa window of the Trust Fund for Africa, which is coming to an end at the end of the year, to answer the region's needs in the area of migration. This will continue to be an important topic of discussion also with the member states, and we all know there's very different views on this, but our overall view is still that the region needs young, well-educated people, and we have to avoid that these are disappearing, not even in an illegal way, but in a way of being hired right out of university if they have the right skills. These people are, these colleagues are missing in the region, and we have to find ways to give them a perspective to develop a life, and to give them a perspective to develop a life in their home countries and not only going somewhere else. Last point, panel 4 on human development, good governance and the rule of law. I listened to particularly with interest to the last debate on anti-corruption support. I think this is something that is becoming more important in the discussions with the region, and that of course happens on very different levels. That was mentioned by several speakers, so I think that's something we will continue to also bring into our policy dialogue, alongside the more classical elements of human rights, rule of law, EU values, which are an important part and integral to our partnership, and therefore are also reflected quite strongly in the new agenda for the Mediterranean. In the Economic Investment Plan, we have a dedicated flagship related to human rights, rule of law, but also modern, effective administrations, governance and accountability, which does foresee actions in support of public administration reform. And that brings us back to the question of how to fight corruption and how to make administrations more responsive to the needs of the citizens and also to the needs of economic development. Huge challenge in the region, but I think we have some interesting lines there, and we'll continue to work on that. Maybe finishing up after the reaction to the specific panels, a little bit what happens now on the level of Brussels. We're now moving, after the communication was adopted, into the programming phase. I will spare you the details. It's a very complex, long process involving member states, involving the parliament, involving various parts of the commission, involving outside stakeholders, including civil society. So that will keep us busy for the next couple of months. But it's true that with the feedback we've had for the communication and the investment plan, with some of the debates that are still ongoing, also with the outcome of the stakeholder consultation that IEMed organized in parallel to the development of the communication, we think we have a good basis to really make sure that these policy aspects are being reflected in the programming documents, that we're not doing business as usual, that we really listen to what stakeholders are thinking and what the needs of the regions are, what the priorities should be set. And that gives us a good ground for really starting anew with a renewed partnership and really bring the Mediterranean out of the pandemic and forward into a hopefully positive future. There's always questions of how things will develop in the region. We know it's very volatile, but we think we have a good basis, and we have lots of allies also amongst people who are interested in what happens to the south. And we're looking forward to engage further with them. So I'll stop here. and probably turn over right to Josep for final remarks. Thanks again to IEMed and to all the colleagues who organized that, for inviting us, for giving us the platform. Thanks for all the good ideas, and this is not going to be the last time we talk about that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Henrikh. In fact, on behalf of the European Institute of the Mediterranean, I would like to send the warm greetings to all of the EuroMeSCo colleagues across the Mediterranean. All of us, we are adapting our work to overcome the impact of the pandemic and to take advantage of these online formats, of course. Thank you all very much to be with us today, for sure. Also, on behalf of the EuroMeSCo network, I would like to thank all the other participants who joined us in this very first segment of this annual conference. Thanks for your active participation. We will convey properly your questions and comments to the European Commission. And also, I would like to address also a special thanks to the IEMed team that made this event possible. Thanks, Emmanuel, Mireia, Anna, Karina, Patricia, Justine, and Ilaria for all your efforts and the good work you have done. In fact, the fact of having all in all almost 300 participants in the whole event illustrates our efforts to reach out way beyond the think tank circles, to engage different communities and stakeholders with different profiles, including all the Arabic audiences, and we made an extra effort in this regard. It also shows that there is a very keen interest in the partnership between the EU and its southern neighborhood, moving indeed into new grounds. I do think that we had a very productive and fruitful debate. We managed to identify together some of the most promising new ideas in this joint communication, some of the issues that have the potential to bring the partnership out of the business as usual mode, as Henrikh said. Through the Euromed survey, through this event, and through a lot of other activities, we will continue to contribute to foster an inclusive debate on the new agenda of the Mediterranean. But we don't want to promote a disconnected academic exercise. We want to generate a truly connected debate, a very operational exchange with the objective to bring forward ideas and recommendations. Not coming only for the European male experts. I do believe that one of our strengths is to mobilize joint expertise from both shores of the Mediterranean and to empower everyone in this debate, including youth and women, in order to reach new insights and new visions. To finish, let me mention only two operational follow-up. One is the call for papers we launched 2 weeks ago in relation with the topics we touch upon this in this conference. The deadline to send proposals is Friday next week, the 23rd of April. You can find all the information related to this call at the EuroMeSCo website. The second is that the following segment of this annual conference that will consist of country events organized in few southern partner countries with the objective to explore more in-depth bilateral dynamics of this new agenda. Please don't hesitate to follow the EuroMeSCo Twitter account. We are posting in the YouTube channel this track of the annual conference, and also with other social media, you could get more information about our upcoming activities, and for sure we will be keep in touch. thank you very much for your attention. And as I said before, we will keep in touch. Thank you.